This LOS is compare gross domestic product and gross national product. Before we jump into the LOS, we'll do a bit of an introduction. Global investors must address two fundamentally interrelated questions: where to invest and in what asset classes. So geography and asset class. Some countries may be attractive from an equity perspective because of their strong economic growth and the profitability of particular domestic sectors or industries. Other countries may be attractive from a fixed income perspective because of their interest rate environment and price stability. To identify markets that are expected to provide attractive investment opportunities, investors must analyze cross-country differences in such factors as expected GDP growth rates, monetary and fiscal policies, trade policies, and competitiveness. From a longer-term perspective, investors also need to consider such factors as a country's stage of economic and financial market development. For example, is it a frontier market, an emerging market, or developed market? Demographics, quality and quantity of physical and human capital, accumulated education and training of workers, and its area or areas of comparative advantage. The aggregate output of a nation over a specified time period is usually measured as its gross domestic product, GDP, or its gross national product, GNP. Gross domestic product measures the market value of all final goods and services produced by factors of production, such as labor and capital, located within a country economy during a given period of time, generally a year or a quarter. Gross national product, GNP, however, measures the market value of all final goods and services produced by factors of production, such as labor and capital, supplied by residents of a country, regardless of whether such production takes place within the country or outside of the country. So the difference between a country's GDP and its GNP is that GDP includes and GNP excludes the production of goods and services by foreigners within that country, whereas GNP includes and GDP excludes the production of goods and services by its citizens outside of the country. Countries that have large differences between GDP and GNP generally have large numbers of citizens who work abroad, for example, Pakistan and Portugal, and or pay more for the use of foreign-owned capital in domestic production than they earn on the capital they own abroad, so for example, Brazil and Canada. Therefore, GDP is more widely used as a measure of economic activity occurring within the country, which in turn affects employment growth and the investment environment. So the last slide had quite a few paragraphs. We're just going to simplify this now into a bit of an equation, okay? So we can measure aggregate output of a country by using gross national product, GNP, or the gross domestic product, which differs with respect to goods and services produced by foreigners and by its citizens abroad. So we'll start with GNP. I put in bold green here. We add the production of goods and services by foreigners within the country. Remember, GDP is within the country. But we subtract the production of goods and services by the country's citizens outside of the country. So we add goods and services by foreigners inside, we subtract goods and services by the country's citizens outside, and that's going to equal our GDP. So I think if you remember this little equation here, it's going to make any most likely, least likely question not too difficult. You just have to write out the equation, look at the wording, and solve. Okay, so an important equation to memorize. And of course, GDP is therefore better for measuring domestic activity. So we're just going to finish this LOS with some definitions and some terminology, some key terms. So imports are goods and services that a domestic economy purchases from other countries. Exports are goods and services that a domestic economy sells to other countries. The terms of trade is the ratio of the price of exports to the price of imports. Increasing terms of trade indicate improvement. Decreasing terms of trade indicate deterioration. So the net exports, of course, is the exports minus the imports. If it's positive, there's a trade surplus. You're exporting more than you're importing. And if it's negative, there's a trade deficit. A country that does not trade with other countries is referred to as a closed economy or being an autarky. The price of goods and services is the autarkic price. Okay, so that's a little factoid buried into the reading that you may want to know. And an economy that is not a closed economy, well, it's the opposite. It's an open economy. If there are no restrictions to trade, the price of goods and services is obviously then the world price in an open economy. Free trade is the case in which there are no restrictions on a country's trade with other countries. Trade protections are restrictions on trade that prevent pricing based on supply and demand. And capital restrictions are limits on the flow of funds into or out of a country. Some measures of international trade. Trade is a percentage of GDP. Another measurement of international trade is FDI, foreign direct investment. That is the amount of the investment by a firm in one country in the assets in another country. Okay. A multinational corporation, MNC, is a company that operates in more than one country. And finally, a foreign portfolio investment, FPI, is a short-term investment in foreign financial instruments. So short-term is probably a key word there. And that's the last slide for this LOS. Thank you.